Having realized that he didn't need to kill people, just marry them and desert them, Johann Hoch embarked on a string of quickie marriages. We continue here with Tomb Snoopers. All right, you got Tomb Snoopers. How you doing? How you doing, Patty?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm excited to see what happens next.
Oh, yeah. Well, I actually did some tomb snooping this weekend.
You did?
Some actual regular tomb snooping. I was up in Massachusetts over the weekend. I was staying at a friend who lived about in Northampton. And, every morning I do a morning mini tour. So, we don't have to leave for Mansfield until later. So is there like a cemetery nearby? And, of course, there were a few. There was this one, West Cemetery in Amherst. It's best known for being where Emily Dickinson is buried.
I was going to say.
Yeah. And, she's such a fascinating character anyway. There's so much mystery about her. I found there's not even really a very good collection of her work out there. There's nothing that really none that really give you much background on the poems, partly because we don't have any. We don't really know what order they were written in, or, what she meant by some of this punctuation, or who she was talking about when she wrote mysterious letters to someone she called Master, which sounds like just erotic fanfic to me, honestly. But I think the mystery is part of what makes it interesting, too. And while there, I did do some tomb snooping. And there's a receiving vault there, like a lot of cemeteries used to have. It's this, a big little mausoleum that goes right into the hillside, and it's what they would stash bodies in the wintertime when it was too cold to dig out the ground.
Oh, because it can't break the ground.
Yeah, you can't break the ground. This used to be, every cemetery had a receiving vault for stuff like this in those days. So naturally, having seen this, we got to see what's inside of this thing.
Sure.
And there was just enough of a crack in the door that I could get a camera in there and see. It's mostly, some old stones and some wood and stuff. It looks like they just piled some rubble in there. They're not using it as a receiving vault anymore. If they had been, I wouldn't have wanted to see.
What kind of? How is it secured? Was it like a padlock?
It's a recent door. They recently redid the door, so there's some kind of a locking mechanism on there. But it's not hermetically sealed or anything.
Right.
So you can, it's wide enough that you could slide a phone or iPad in if you don't mind scratching it up a little bit. So luckily I had a screen protector.
Sure.
That's
wild.
We're always out doing this tomb snooping stuff. And then the next day I had a day in Boston, so I headed over to their library just to check some of the newspapers that haven't been digitized yet, at least not publicly, because, it's been a long time since I really worked on new H.H. Holmes stuff. Mm-hmm. But I had a day to kill in Boston. You know what they say about Boston? It's like for people who crave the thrill of New York prices but don't want all those pesky things to do.
Right. It's a little quieter, a little slower paced.
But just as expensive. So hit their library. They were, and a lot of it turns out a lot of the Boston papers have been digitized, but you kind of have to be at the library to see them. And the search feature is just clunky as all get out. But I was able to get some stuff from the week H.H. Holmes was arrested there. Okay. And some of it did have, new data, new quotes. And that's the thing is, what I always tell people is, like, when I get really obsessive with these stories, I want to get, like, every piece of data, and that means looking at, as much as possible, every different newspaper from the town from the day something was going on, especially a town that was where the action was. Like, when Holmes was arrested in Boston, I want all the Boston papers from that week. They took him to Philadelphia a few days later. Get me all the Philadelphia papers. And usually a couple of them are digitized, and quite a few of them are still microfilm only, or you have to go to the library to see it. And that's also the case with some of the Hoch files that will come up in this episode. There's a lot of genealogy ones. Like, if you've ever been on, like, Ancestry or Family Search or any of those, a lot of times you come upon a record and it says there's just, like, a graphic where the record would be. And it says you have to go to a family research library to see the actual record. You have to be logged into one of their computers.
Of course.
And there are a lot of those out there. If you live in a large metropolitan area, you're probably not too far. There's 2 or 3 in Chicago. I know the Newberry Library in Chicago, you can get all of that stuff. Trouble is, you can never find parking at that place.
No kidding. Oh my God.
Down there in the Gold Coast area, it's just a pain in the neck. So I've never really used that one. I've definitely used Newberry for, like, old documents and stuff that you cannot get anywhere else.
Right.
But for that one, I just happened to be in New York the week that I was doing it. The Family Research, the big Mormon building, is right across from Lincoln Center.
Sure.
And when I went in, they were about to close for renovation. They said, well, technically right now you have to be a member of the church. Are you a member of the church? And I could have just smiled and nodded as long as they didn't ask me any questions.
I hate to say this, but you would totally get away with saying you're in the Mormon Church.
Yeah, well, I just said, well, no, not at the moment. And they said, oh, well, it's not crowded here, so shh.
Nice.
So they were very nice. They let me on, and I got to go in, because there was, when we left Johann Hoch, he had murdered a woman in Cincinnati, married another woman in Cincinnati, then gone off using her previous husband's name, Fred Dess, or Doess, and Dessing or Daring or various variations of that come up in all of the paperwork. And there was a rumor that he had married someone in Pennsylvania, but then gotten away with it because of loopholes in the laws, which is possible. We did find that one record for Barbara Chuston marrying Frederick Dessing right in the right time period, but there's almost nothing else about her. But this takes us to the end of 1896. Mm-hmm. And right after that, he started on this whole spree. It seems like he had figured out, hey, I don't need to kill people to get all their money.
Sure.
I mean, he had gotten away with that. Good for him. So he just deserted a woman back in Chicago, then immediately married and deserted a woman in San Francisco, killed again in Cincinnati, then deserted again a couple more times. Just seemed to think, this is a lot easier.
Yeah.
A lot less trouble on his part. Didn't have to bother with funeral expenses or anything. Not that he ever actually paid them. So at this point, we embark really on just this spree of about a year in 1897. Where he's just marrying people up and down. And for this, I had to really go into the archives, because, there was, on Ancestry, you can search just all marriages by the name Fred in a given time period. Or, just that's going to bring up tons and tons of stuff. But you can search pretty specifically for marriage records on there.
Okay.
So this ended up making the news in 1898 when he was arrested. There was all these newspaper articles and trying to enumerate all of his different marriages, some of which were correct and some of which were not. But usually this was under some variation of the name Frederick W. Dessa. So I just started poking that in, and one of the things that came up was July 1st of 1897, there was a marriage in Brooklyn between Frederick William Dessa with an A, and someone named Margaret Cole. Or I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's spelled Coelle, though in the marriage record it actually has a different date for a different spelling for her father's name. Like her father is spelled Choll.
Oh, really?
And that's really one of the hang-ups with research in this case is everybody had 6 different names and spelled them 9 different ways.
Yeah, is that sometimes a function of what the person recording the name might do? Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of these people probably didn't speak English particularly well.
Sure.
So that one I could only really find at the time just like a summary of the record online. But I wrote that one down, and when I was in New York, I went over to that library, looked it up, and here it is from Frederick William Dessa, right away, 69 Irving Place, which is an address that he used in New York with another person that's more verified.
Okay.
And then father's name Adam, mother's maiden name Eliza Weber. That's them.
Right.
So this is his tell. He never thought of a good lie for what his parents' names were.
Right. It's in one place where he doesn't seem very nimble.
Yeah. One thing he hadn't been thinking ahead far enough. So this Margaret Cole, or however we pronounce her name, never came up as a possible Hoch wife at the time, even when this was just a massive media sensation in any book that has come up since. So this was a whole new find. This is a whole new one to add on to the list.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's always exciting when you can find something like that.
I believe it.
And it's amazing how often you actually can. I mean, people think that everything's been researched, or at least academia has gotten to everything. A lot of these files, nobody has looked at in a long time, like the divorce files I talked about an episode or 2 back between Minnie Warnecki and her husband. Nobody's looking at that stuff. And in the divorce file of Hoch's last Chicago victim, with her previous husband, there was data that was really important to this case that nobody knew at the time and has not come up since. This is just what I love about this stuff. We really might solve a mystery or rewrite history.
Absolutely.
Every day we're out here making cocktails.
Well, it's also a good thing for people to know that if something intrigues them, if there's some issue, some topic, like you could be the one that preserves that history and explores it.
Yeah, and most people tend to do it with people they're related to, I find. And that's the thing. The genealogy boom of the last few years has led to a lot of papers getting digitized. It's also onto a lot more people hoping that you'll be really impressed with who their sixth cousin is. But incidentally, Taylor Swift's sixth cousin was Emily Dickinson.
Get out of here. Does she know that? Does Taylor know that?
Probably. It's a sixth cousin. Like her 10th great-grandmother is Emily's 6th great-grandmother.
I'm sorry, how did we find that out? And that was something that
who knows how they came up with this. Well,
amazing.
Like Ancestry will give you a list of all your famous ancestors once you've got enough family tree in there. And, we're also relying that everybody was telling the truth about who the father was.
Right.
Which is a little bit iffy, I would say. But it's always kind of amusing when you see this. Like, almost every president has some common relative or something. Interesting stuff, but because of all of this, so much more has been digitized, especially newspapers. That's really apparently where the business end of it is for people doing genealogy stuff. And I don't really do, that's why all this stuff is getting digitized, which is great for me, even though I don't do much genealogy myself. I do other people's genealogy for this, like going through these people's records. Let me see my notes on here. All we really know about Maggie Cole is that her first husband, Jacob, died a year after their wedding in 1886. She might have had a couple of young kids. 1903, she married somebody else and was back to using the name Cole, so it must have been a very brief marriage to this Fred Dessa guy. He probably just disappeared with all of her money within a couple of weeks. In fact, it can't have been long, as it was just a few weeks, just like the next month he was married again. I put together a whole timeline of all of these things. About 3 weeks after that wedding, there was somebody who claimed to have married him under the name Henry Hartman in Cincinnati. It's about the right place, but I couldn't find quite enough stuff on that one. Next one we know for sure was in Milwaukee in August. Just about 2 months after marrying Maggie Cull, he married a woman named Maximiliana Spurl.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Maximiliana.
Yeah, Maximiliana. It sounds
very
very fancy. She was working as a domestic for what's just described as a well-known family. I never found anybody that said who that well-known family was. But she had saved some money. They went up to Milwaukee. She was living in Chicago, but went up to Milwaukee to get married, as they sometimes did. I guess maybe there was like less paperwork that you needed there or something.
And it's so romantic.
Yes, get away to Milwaukee. Get whisked away to Milwaukee. Which is Algonquin for the good land.
Well done.
I don't think our generation can hear Milwaukee without Milwaukee. Yeah. But the justice of the peace, like a year or so later, remembered this. Oh yeah, she came like holding up this satchel, saying, "I've got a lot of cash in here." Like bragged to everybody that she had $2,300 in cash.
Oh boy.
Which a few weeks later, she was going before the same judge and saying, "My husband has deserted me and he took all of my money." And this made a little bit of news at the time. Within I think it was her with about a month later, she was living in Baltimore and advertising her services as a domestic, living in her sister's house and saying, the ads say specifically, "I don't cook" or something.
Well, Scrub won't cook?
Yeah, she was one of the first to go to reporters about this. I mean, Maria Dess had gone to reporters before, and there was now stuff about, like, Clara Bartle's relatives in Cincinnati. Her relatives back in Germany were launching lawsuits and everything. But Hoch had already taken his money and ran. He wasn't, like, thinking about that building as much anymore. There were some reports later he was still getting rent money from one of those Cincinnati buildings that he inherited. And next one I've got data on is a maybe. Is in November of 1897, there's some paperwork for a wedding in Chicago between a guy named Jacob Schmidt and a woman named Bertha Knopp.
Oh dear.
Or Bertha Knopp, K-N-O-P. You'd never, even if somebody told me how they pronounced that name today, I wouldn't know how they pronounced it then.
I've heard it both ways.
Yeah, it could go, who knows how she was going. Now, there's not much that we know about this. We know that what I could find about this Bertha Knopp is that in 1903, 6 years later, when she died in a fire, she was still going by Bertha Knopp in paperwork, but married to a guy named Stein. So it sounds like she had been married and deserted quickly. Which makes it sound like a Hoch case, but the timeline is right. There's just not really enough data here.
There isn't like a court record of her saying that she was robbed.
And Jacob Schmidt was Hoch's real name. It's a common enough name that it's really hard to tell whether that might have been him or not. There's not a good enough record that says like the parents' names that would have been a really good tell. He wasn't normally using Jacob Schmidt as a name at the time, but I've kept that one as a maybe on the list because there's just not enough data to tell. Also, Jacob Schmidt is such a common name.
Right.
There's just nothing.
But there's a lot that lines up for you.
Yeah, a lot of it lines up, and then there were a couple others around 1897, including a guy named Fred Daring, which is a name that he was using at the time. Married a woman named Maybelle Clayton in Milwaukee.
Oh, boy.
And here we've got just about the right timeline, but this was definitely a different guy by the name of Fred Daring. It's kind of a cautionary tale. They lived much beyond this. Now, a lot of these articles that came out the next year when he was in jail said that in December of 1897, he married a woman named Carolyn Schneider in either Baltimore or New York, depending on what the article was. And it turns out a lot of women named Carolyn Schneider got married that year, but I couldn't really find a thing about it. What I finally did, this was one where I really had to get into like Ancestry and just like specify the specific date in New York, look under like everybody named Fred who got married that day, everybody with a last name anywhere remotely like it, and finally I did find there was a wedding between a guy by the name of Fred, I think he did go by Fred Dessa in it. Yeah, Fred Daring. Fred Daring that day said he was from Kentucky, but gave his mother's name as Eliza, and it turned out that the parson's name was Schneider. And the parson who performed the wedding was known as the marrying parson. He'd been written up in papers everywhere. He performed more marriages than anybody, which seems to be the kind of person that Hoch used to go to, like somebody who advertised their services in the paper. So her name, the wedding was actually...
Possibly like with the volume, he might get lost in the numbers too.
Probably, yeah. And in this case, like the newspapers just got confused, I guess, as to what the name was. You know, we're going through telegraphs and early telephones and like the rewrite guy calling in, getting a call in from the footman, and who knows what gets lost in translation here and there. But yeah, Schneider... The woman's name was Amanda Bertz Dickhuth.
Okay.
That one didn't really come up in the press too much of the time, as they never seemed to get her name right. But he was married to her just very briefly in December of 1897, probably less than 1 month, from what I could tell. So he just took her money and ran. Now, right after this came one of the weirdest cases that I don't think is him, but is so much fun that I wanted to talk about it anyway.
Ooh, okay, tell us.
So... January 5th of 1898, or it would have been January 4th when our story begins, there was a guy by the name of William Varner who was making appearances with a local theatrical troupe at Ottumwa, Iowa. He wasn't a member of the troupe, he just kind of showed up and started doing singing on stage with them. This is not typically a Hoch name. The guy said that he was like 28 and born in Detroit, which is kind of hard to place, hard to reconcile with Hoch, who would have been older and...
Yeah, we're nearly at 40 now,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, he would have been about 40 years old at this point, and still by most accounts spoke in such a thick German accent that you could hardly understand him. So this doesn't sound like quite the thing, but William Varner was making guest appearances with a local theatrical troupe, and on the night of January 4th, 1898, he convinced them to go out and have an orgy at the Baker House, which was a house of ill repute in Ottumwa. Now, we mentioned this has come up a little bit before. We talked about Ottumwa declared itself the video game capital of the world in 1982 and had a whole like video game Olympics. But it sounds like January 4th of 1898 was like the biggest party they ever had that didn't involve an Atari. This was like the whole theatrical troupe went partying at the Baker House, and at the end of it, William Varner married the madam. And one of the actors married one of the women there. And the paperwork for these weddings is still extant. It's still on file. It was pretty easy to dig up. Annie Pratt was the name of the madam. And this story eventually was connected to Hoch. A guy who had been a photographer in town or something said, yeah, I recognize that picture. That's the guy who married Annie Pratt. So at least we have this one, possibly just a guy with a mustache. This would have been telling the story 7 years after the fact.
They wanted to attach themselves to a bigger story.
It was a bigger one. But Annie Pratt just turns up all over the news in Iowa Iowa and Peoria over the course of a few years. He was like the biggest madam in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. One of the bigger madams in Peoria. in and out of the news for years. At one point, she divorced a husband and took out an ad saying, "I am not responsible for any debts he incurs," which is something people did when they got divorced. It's almost always the man saying that they're not responsible for their soon-to-be ex-wife's debts anymore. And for the woman to take out that ad is a little bit unusual. She's in and out of court in Cedar Rapids all the time, but the marriage record survives. It was a very quick marriage before she got deserted with $800 worth of diamonds. We know that there's all these stories about Hoch related to diamonds that never really add up to anything. So on the one hand, it kind of sounds like him. It's not exactly like him. It's a different name than he would have used. It's a bit of a different style than he would have used. It seems like it would be hard for him to pass himself off that way, but the timeline works. Mm-hmm. He usually stuck with the larger cities, but, who's to say he didn't want to get out of New York and just end up off the train in Ottumwa, Iowa. And, I believe I'll give Iowa a try.
And why not Ottumwa?
Why not? You got to end up somewhere, I guess. And so that one was one. It was kind of this rabbit hole that I knew was never going to fit into the book. The book has a tight word count. I'm not going to be able to go into the whole history of Annie Pratt and her brothels in the book. It's such a side trip, but that's why we have these podcasts and the Patreon attached to it. So
the brothels are often the side tracks, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Once you find a brothel story, you got to dig into that.
I feel like we don't give enough attention. Like, it's usually the sort of afterthought, except for the Biggest Little Whorehouse in Texas.
Right.
In Texas.
With the Dolly Parton movie.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, usually it's a sort of like they're passing through, and the showgirl or the call girls are all on the side. But anyway, so I think Annie Pratt needs her.
She needs her own. She needs her story told a little bit, right. And it's. Herbert Asbury, who wrote Gem of the Prairie, the book is now Gangs of Chicago, is like where the Holmes story, or the H.H. Holmes story, originates today. He always told the story that when he was a kid, like, preachers would come in and lecture about all the temptations and prostitutes in your very neighborhood. And he's like, our town couldn't have supported more than one prostitute, any more than one. They would have starved to death. But people liked hearing that kind of story about their town,
of course.
Which is kind of how it became his whole MO as a crime writer. It's just exaggerating everything or making up news stories just because people liked that kind of story.
Oh, man.
But apparently there was quite a brothel scene in Ottumwa, Iowa, and quite an opera house scene as well. So that takes us into 1898. Probably wasn't him, but we know that about 2 weeks later there was a marriage in Jersey City.
Oh, now we're in Jersey City. Okay.
Yeah, no, we're probably just like back in New York. He's hopping back and forth between Chicago, Milwaukee, and New York at this point.
Okay. After coming back from San Francisco.
Yeah. Woo. After coming back from San Francisco and Cincinnati, so just like hopping wherever the trains will take you.
Sure.
This January of 1898, he married a woman named Minnie Lemke. When she eventually started talking to the press, by then she was Minnie Westfall. There's a lot of Minnies in these stories,
Yeah, when did that?
It was just like people named Margaret or Mary always tended to call themselves Minnie.
Another for Margaret's. Okay.
Yeah.
They got Meg, Peg,
Midge. Yeah.
Yep.
So there's a couple of different transcripts. Eventually, in 1905, she went and talked to all the detectives in New York after Hoch was captured and said, I met this guy through a matrimonial ad in a German newspaper. He told me that he was rich, and he took me to this big house at 69 Irving and said, I own this building. And she said, oh, really? Let's go in. He said, no, let's go get something to eat first. So he took her out to get something to eat, talked her into marrying him that very night. They went over to Jersey City to do it. And then when she eventually went back to that building, she found out he did not own it at all.
No.
So,
no alarm bells anywhere along the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
In this case, we've got quite a bit of the matrimonial records on it, and this is all quite confirmed to be him. So from there, this is January of 1898. We know that she was single at the time of this marriage. Later married a guy named Westfall, died of cancer in 1913. I think the building at 69 Irving is still there. There's a coffee shop on the first floor there now.
Nice.
I went in for a cup of coffee. Nobody knew anything about Johann Hoch being there, but that's...
Damn!
Yeah.
Oh, no word of mouth or anything.
No, even like "do not sell to this man" picture up on the espresso machine.
If only they knew.
Yep. So... And he's back in Chicago by March, where he marries a woman by the name of Lizzie Schmidt. Now, she had been working as a domestic for a minister up in Wisconsin. Then he died and left her $300 and a large crucifix.
Oh.
I'm sure just what she always wanted.
That was in the will, specifically? You have the large crucifix. Huh?
Yep, this was. She'd been written up in the press a little bit by this point. So she met this Hoch character who was calling himself Fred Dessing at the time. Met him, I think, through a matrimonial ad, and he told her, "Hey, I'm rich. I've got all this furniture here in Chicago. Come look at how well furnished my place is." He had bought all this furniture on credit. And then he said, "Hey, I just need to rest at this hotel for a while. You just check in here and I'll be down in a bit." And then never came back, and her trunk never showed up either, which had all of her cash in it.
Oopsie.
So she went to the cops right away. But by the time they found out where this guy was, he had already been arrested, as it turned out. He had been arrested for schemes with the furniture, for renting this furniture and then not paying for it, or trying to sell it off instead of paying for it. It was a very H.H. Holmes kind of trick. And he was renting a lot of it from the same guy over and over, a guy named Fred Magerstad, whose brother Ernest was the sheriff. So this was a bit of a problem. So eventually he was arrested and put in jail here in Chicago, put in the Bridewell. And this would be the first time he became a media sensation, after a year of these quickie marriages and quickie desertions, in which at least he wasn't killing anybody. So. Yeah. Changed his whole MO for a little while there. And in these cases, we don't really know much about him. For most of the earlier ones, we got some idea of what kind of persona he took on. Like with Martha, he pretended to be very pious. He was this fascinating shipwreck survivor at the time of his first marriage. And with these ones, they were so quick that I don't think anybody really got a sense of his personality. They were all just a 1-month marriage at most.
Oh, man.
And then he was off to another city to try to do the same thing.
He's getting more efficient.
Yeah. So, all right, well, that will about wrap us for this one. And this one, there's going to be a ton of stuff to post on the Patreon for this one. And also, if you remember, we talked about fins and sawbucks.
Oh, yeah.
A couple episodes back. I did look that up. And it's just they're not necessarily a Chicago thing first, but as of 1929, they were thought of as Chicago things. People associated with like the Chicago underworld. So yeah, there's an article on that. There's like a free version and a longer version on the Patreon under the paid one.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, it fell into quite this rabbit holes. It ended up like being tied into like the spiritualist banks of Chicago in the 1850s. I have no idea how that got connected exactly.
Oh my God.
But lots of crazy stories, and we're always finding new stuff. As one thing of research, so many of my best stories that I tell on tours and things are things that I've seen in the next column over when I'm researching something else.
What's this?
That's why it's great to look at the entire page of what you're researching, but of course you get really distracted. But that's, I always tell people I had ADHD back before it was cool. And with this, I'm really technically staying on topic the whole time. All right, so we have just gotten up to Hoch being arrested. We will be back next week with another episode of Tomb Snoopers. I'm Adam.
I'm Patty.
All right, we will see you next week.
Yay.
As always, there's lots more data, including all the stuff we've talked about today, over at patreon.com/tombsnoopers, plus early access and a whole lot more.